You know, I'm not proud to admit this, but there's a little part of me that's slightly annoyed by how humble the All Blacks seemed to be when Australia mashed them out of the Tasman on Saturday and followed up last round's PTSD with a bout of perf traumatic stress disorder. Because after years of watching them on the less humiliating end of hammerings, I'd almost hoped to see Beauden Barrett smash the floor in frustration, Ben Smith wearing expressions so white you'd think he'd forgotten the end of the tax year, Kieran Reid to pull literally any other face than his horrifying fixed grin, because this Saturday the Wallabies walked in and smashed up what remained of the Tier 1 form book and walloped the All Blacks in what was their joint heaviest defeat of all time. Australia were fantastic. It was their best performance of this World Cup cycle, taking apart the number one team in the world just when everyone looked to be writing them off as World Cup contenders. So, how did the Wallabies shatter the All Blacks, and what did we learn about both teams with weeks to go until the big one begins? Australia's fundamental problem this season has been that they played an incredibly flat attack, which can be lethal when the team's going forward, but the side lacks the component parts to generate that forward momentum, meaning defences find it incredibly easy to just smash them backwards, hence them not scoring many tries or making much in the way of meterage. So Australia used two main workarounds this weekend, which allowed them to get the most out of their attack. Now, a lot of pundits get really caught up in the idea of the gain line, and the idea that if you don't cross it, your team is destined to be in reverse gear until it eventually backs its way all the way out of the stadium into the Swan River. However, generating go forward and crossing the gain line are not the same thing. Look at this example. The gain line is way over here. But by squeezing through and battering back some defenders, Australia managed to generate go forward and get quick ball. Yes, they've technically lost ground, but it feels like they're going forward to both teams because they've managed to make the defenders take some backward steps. And in terms of getting the attack going, this is what really matters. So Australia this weekend would happily set further back than normal, with Leila Yafana inviting big ball carries in from deep with heavy support, allowing quick ball that could then be used to fire the team forward the next phase. They were willing to lose some yards just to get things going. The other change can be found in the performance of Nick White, a man who looks more like the protagonist from an indie movie than an international rugby player. 30 seconds into the game, at just the third ruck of the match, White picked up and sniped at the fringe of the breakdown. At 4 minutes, he did it again. At 8.5 minutes, he did it again. And then he just continued to do it again and 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 again. Nick White, a scrum half, took the ball into contact an almost unprecedented 14 times on Saturday. Even scrum halves who are famous for their sniping runs, such as Gareth Davis or Danny Kerr, average about 4 carries a game. White himself made more carries this weekend than in his previous 5 tests put together. This stat just demonstrates this wasn't White playing off instinct, it was tactical. If you look back at the game, virtually every carry White made was width-wise in the middle third of the field. This is because when the ball is central, the All Blacks like to spread their defence out over either side, meaning the likes of Whitelock and Reid can be there to make robust hits on the opposition's main threats, rather than waiting around the breakdown for a snipe that never comes. So, with just one guard on either side, Australia ran what I like to call the All Black and White gambit. Australia had White, or an acting scrum half, deliberately engage the defence around the ruck as many times in the opening 10-15 minutes as they normally would an entire match, and then continue to do so reasonably often for the rest of the game. Yes, this sometimes meant that White or Hooper would slide through and make yardage, but mostly it drew the All Blacks' attention to the 9 at every phase. It made him always in the forefront of the defence's mind. Often, even once the ball was away, they were still keyed in on White, and this presented opportunity. By having White just pick up and hold the ball for half a second, they could create an extra few inches as the All Blacks' main guard or pillar moved in on White, anticipating the little shit to try it again. It was then that White just had to drop off a pass to a forward, hitting a hole at an angle next to an already occupied defender, allowing Australia to get going forward, making more meterage than they would have had another scrum half just popped off the base. A prime example of this was Salakai Lotto's try, where Kieran Reid shoots in on White, which turns what was a really well covered short side into a 2-on-2. Ben Smith then oversells himself by looking for the intercept and makes it a 2-on-1. Rory Arnold makes the pass, and Salikaia-Loto makes it a try. So you'd think the obvious lesson to learn here is that, knowing the threat the white possesses, the All Blacks are overcommitting to the fringes in retaliation and need to calm down a tad. Except Nick White's own try, moments later, showed perfectly what happens when the All Blacks didn't commit, as the ultra-alert Wallabies just walked right through them and then walked right through Beauden Barrett. In similar fashion, at the end of the first half, we saw the Wallabies picking and driving closer.
Oh, what about that? Send him off! Send the drifting gate off! Get him off the field! That was diabolical! Get him off the field!
The red card to Scott Barrett, a regular fringe guard for the All Blacks, just opened up yet more opportunities to pull the gambit, as New Zealand tried to strike a balance between wide and narrow defence that they were already struggling to find with 15 men. And, incidentally, yes, this is a red card. There's a shoulder to the head and no attempt to wrap the arms. It isn't really controversial either. There's a clear guidework, and the only people I've seen disagreeing with the call were All Blacks fans, and fair enough, you're entitled to be biased, I totally respect that. If Alan Wynne-Jones had done this, I'd be suggesting Hooper should be the one sent off for having the nerve to put his face anywhere close to such beautiful divine shoulders. And former pros who probably took a few too many shots like this to their head in their time. You know what? Kudos to Jerome Garces, who is, despite being French, an excellent referee and, unlike Campbell, showed the bottle required to give the correct decision. And whilst White was busier at the fringe than a flyering comedian in Edinburgh, the introduction of Will Genia changed things again. Genia came on and just whipped the ball away quickly. This changed the threat the All Blacks were facing around the edges. They were being asked to react instead of to think, having just spent an hour conditioning themselves to do the opposite. The moment they got used to watching both White and the runners invited onto the ball, on came Genia, who skipped the invitation and just let everyone right into the All Blacks' house. Most notably, Kurtley Beale, who really made it a party by scoring this try to seal it. The ability to generate go forwards allowed the Wallabies to do what they do best to the best of their ability, especially with Rugby's Bieber, James O'Connor, coming in at 13 to give them an extra distributor in midfield, and Kurtley Beale at 15, making the Wallabies learn the benefit of having a fullback who can actually pass. It didn't result in a try, but I think perhaps the best example of the difference between the two teams can be found in this example of the Wallabies doing what they do from early in the game. The basic idea was to pull the All Blacks out of shape and get the ball wide, forcing Beauden Barrett to come up from fullback and leave some space in behind for a kick to be chased. This worked really well. However, not long after, the All Blacks tried to run a very similar move, and it didn't. So, why did the Australian version work and New Zealand's not? Let's look closer at the Wallabies one. Leali'ifano stands flat off the line out. The other backs are flat on each other, but back far deeper. This creates a kind of best of both worlds scenario in which the players have time on the ball whilst retaining the benefits that a flat attack provides. O'Connor is in as a distributor and Karevi are in the middle as carrying options. Hodge, Corey Beattie wait out on their respective wings. They're kind of irrelevant for now. So the All Blacks know what's coming. It's fairly standard setup. Except, as soon as the pass is made, the centres switch. O'Connor floats onto the ball and into the 13 channel. It's normally Jack Goodhue's job to cut off the wide attack like he really should his hair. So, in order to prevent him doing this, O'Connor looks to engage him, to draw him in, and given his haircut history, probably asking for his barber's name. So, when the ball leaves O'Connor's hands, there's little Goodhue can do. But thankfully, Ioane's read it. This is a simple strike play to bring Corey Beattie, their quickest player, in on the angle. Except, it isn't. The ball goes wide to Hodge, who drags Barrett up out of position and stays on his feet just long enough for Corey Beattie to complete his full wipe from one wing over to the other and then slides the kick down the touchline. Whereas the Wallabies were happy enough to drift off Barrett when he grabs it out the back because they know they don't know what he's going to do. The All Blacks are far more sure of what's happening when it goes out for the simple reason that, generally speaking, Corey Beattie doesn't pass. 4 of the 6 Wallaby backs have played pro rugby at fly half, but instead they bring in their least likely option to distribute. They know the All Blacks will never see it coming. This, using your team's perceived weakness to your benefit, is the kind of inventive thinking the All Blacks lacked. Their attacking structure is excellent. It's probably still the best in the world. So they just trust that rather than taking outright risks. The Wallabies, however, look to do something different to play the options the defence would rule as impossible. It's high risk, high reward, but on Saturday, the rewards made the team so high you'd think Czech had called up Carmichael Hunt. Because once they got themselves going forward, the Wallabies actually had to do alarmingly little to deconstruct the Kiwi defence. Their first try through Reece Hodge was a horrendous misread again by Ben Smith, who sells himself completely by coming in on O'Connor instead of trusting the rest of his defence. It's a miracle offload, but it never should have left Hodge completely unopposed. The fact even Ben Smith is shooting in to make rash decisions kind of sums up what's wrong with this All Blacks team. Simply put, this is the least calm New Zealand side I've ever seen. I've seen the All Blacks have weeks in which they were rattled by circumstance, but I've never seen them so consistently able to be baffled and knocked off their game. They really showed this in the final set of plays, needing 2 tries in 10 minutes. They looked to rush their attack instead of calmly working their way upfield. It's a far cry from the way they fought back into the game in Dublin in 2013, or even closed out the game against the Wallabies 2 years ago after the Aussies looked to have won it. Because losing is increasingly something that the All Blacks know how to do. They've slipped from being unbeatable to just being kind of the best. And even then, they could be about to lose that tag too. They're no doubt holding things back for the World Cup, but the nature of this defeat made you really question whether they're going to need to be practicing those humble faces a lot more often over the next few months. Rugby! Am I right? Rugby! If you enjoyed that rugby, then thank you very much for the rugby. I appreciate rugby. Additionally, thank you to everyone that rugby's on Patreon. I really appreciate your continued rugby to the rugby. And if you indeed rugby, then thank you greatly. If you do happen to like rugby, then perhaps you can rugby to the Find a Player app, where you can some rugby, and if you do use the Squidge Rugby, then you can use it to meet some rugby strangers who like rugby, and maybe together you can rugby, or do other sports such as rugby, or maybe even falconry, but rugby mostly. Additionally, thank you to everyone that's continued to rugby, and if you don't like rugby, then rugby to you, and rugby to everyone else, especially your mother.
And what goes through your mind right now?
What a magnificent performance! We all can't speak!